16 Russian motorcycles were pushed toward Ukraine's defensive line on the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk axis. But the real shock was not only the number. It was the way the assault was built. This was not a classic Russian armored column moving in one heavy line. The motorcycles were split into smaller groups, moving several minutes apart, trying to blend into tree lines, dirt roads, and narrow tracks. Their mission was simple but dangerous. Find a weak point before Ukrainian defenders could fully understand where the main push was coming from. This shows how the war in Donbass is changing. Russian tanks, BMPs, and APCs are now much easier to detect once they leave cover. Ukrainian Reconnaissance UAVs can watch the road, read the dust, follow the turns, and turn every movement into a target. So Russia is sending smaller, faster, and cheaper assault groups into the same deadly space. But speed has a price. A motorcycle can move faster than an armored vehicle, but it has no armor, no roof, and no protected cabin. Once an FPV drone locks onto the route, the rider has almost nowhere to hide. Stay with this story, because what happened next reveals a hard lesson of modern war. A convoy can lose the battle before it ever sees the first trench. So was Russia really searching for Ukraine's weak point? Or were those motorcycles already riding into a target map prepared from above? Russia did not open this assault with a large armored column. It opened with a smaller and harder-to-read pattern, built around motorcycles, spacing, and movement through broken ground. The first sign of the attack was not a tank engine or a line of BMPs moving in the open. It was a group of motorcycles appearing near the approach routes toward the Ukrainian line. They did not all leave at the same time. Instead, the Russian unit broke the movement into 3 small groups with only a few bikes in each one. From the Russian side, the idea was simple. A large armored push can be seen early, especially when it crosses open fields or moves along a known road. A tank leaves a heavy track. A BMP throws dust behind it. An APC creates heat, noise, and a clear shape on the route. Once Ukrainian reconnaissance sees that kind of movement, the defenders can begin preparing FPV drones, mines, artillery, or direct fire before the vehicles get close. Motorcycles offer a different picture. They are smaller, faster, and easier to scatter across several tracks. A few riders can move through a narrow path, cut along a tree line, or cross damaged ground where a heavier vehicle would be forced to slow down. This gives Russian commanders a cheaper way to test the route without risking several armored vehicles at once. But the attack also carried a clear weakness from the beginning. The smaller groups were not invisible. They were only less obvious. Every bike still raised dust. Every turn still showed direction. Every pause still showed uncertainty. Even the distance between the groups created information for anyone watching from above. The first group did not charge straight toward the trench line. It moved close to a low tree line and kept changing direction along small tracks. That movement was to reduce exposure and make it harder for Ukraine to know whether this was the main push or only a forward probe. The riders used the ground like a screen, trying to stay near cover without fully disappearing into it. This was the first layer of the contest. Russia was trying to shape the picture before Ukraine could read it. If Ukrainian defenders reacted too quickly, they might reveal where their drones, firing points, or observation teams were focused. If they waited too long, the motorcycles might get closer to a trench entrance, a broken building, or a covered route that could support the next stage of the assault. That is why the timing between the groups became important. One small unit moving forward could be dismissed as a raid. A second group following minutes later suggested something larger. A third group could mean Russia was trying to build pressure in layers, not simply rush one point. The pattern forced Ukraine to watch, compare, and decide which movement mattered most. From the ground, the tactic may have looked flexible. The riders were not packed into one easy target, and they had enough speed to cross exposed patches quickly. From the sky, however, the same movement began to form a map. The leading bikes showed the direction. The following groups showed depth. The tree line showed where they hoped to hide. The tracks showed where they might return or where more vehicles could enter later. If Ukraine had struck too early, it might have destroyed one bike and missed the larger plan. But by waiting, the Reconnaissance UAV could see the assault taking form. And that delay would soon become the most dangerous part of the trap. The Ukrainian UAV did not rush into the fight because the most valuable target was not yet clear. At this stage, the drone was not acting like a weapon. It was acting like the eye of the battlefield. It stayed high enough to keep a wider view and far enough to avoid giving away Ukraine's reaction too early. From that position, the operator could watch the road, the tree line, the turns, and the space between the Russian motorcycle groups. The first Russian group had already created movement along the approach route, but one group alone was not enough to explain the plan. It could have been bait meant to force Ukraine to launch FPV drones before the real assault appeared. That is why the Reconnaissance UAV kept watching instead of calling for an immediate strike. Every second added more information. The drone could see which track the motorcycles preferred, where they slowed down, and which parts of the route gave them cover. It could also see whether the riders were moving with confidence or only testing the ground. A sudden turn near the trees, a short pause near a dirt path, or a rider looking for a way around rough terrain all became useful signs. Then the second motorcycle group appeared. Russia was not only trying to push several soldiers toward the trench line, it was trying to find a path that could later support more force behind it. The second group also helped Ukraine measure the rhythm of the assault. If it followed the same direction, then the route had been chosen in advance. If it moved toward the same tree line, then that area was probably part of the Russian plan. If it stayed far enough behind the first group, then Moscow was trying to keep pressure in layers instead of losing all riders in one strike. This is where the battle became more dangerous for the Russian side. The longer the UAV watched, the more the assault lost its mystery. The motorcycles were still moving fast on the ground, but their speed did not hide the structure from above. The first group showed the opening path. The second group showed that the movement had depth. The empty space behind them raised the next question. Was armored support coming next? Ukraine had to make that decision carefully. A strike too early might destroy one motorcycle, but leave the main design untouched. A strike too late could allow the riders to reach a covered position near the Ukrainian line. The UAV operator was watching for the moment when the cost of waiting became higher than the value of more information. On the ground, the Russian riders may have believed that speed was still their main shield. They were cutting through broken paths, using trees as cover, and moving in a way that made the assault harder to judge from eye level. But from the sky, each bend in the route became data. Each gap between riders showed control or confusion. Each repeated track showed where the next target might appear. This is why reconnaissance became the first real weapon in the fight. The UAV turned the Russian movement into a readable pattern, and that pattern could guide the next stage of the attack. So the key question is not only whether Ukraine could hit the first motorcycle. The harder question is whether waiting for the second group gave Ukraine a clearer view of the entire assault. In this kind of battle, patience can be as dangerous as the FPV drone itself. The first Ukrainian strike was not aimed at the easiest motorcycle. It was aimed at the point that could break the Russian assault from inside. By this stage, the Reconnaissance UAV had watched enough to understand that the motorcycles were not moving as a random group. They were working in layers, with one element testing the route, another following behind, and a possible support force still waiting farther back. That made the first FPV strike extremely important. If Ukraine hit the wrong bike, the attack might lose only one rider. If it hit the right link, the whole movement could start to lose control. The target appeared near the middle of the motorcycle formation. It was not the fastest rider, and it was not the closest one to the Ukrainian line. But its position mattered. A bike moving between groups could carry a radio, a small jamming device, or a soldier responsible for keeping the assault connected. In a fast motorcycle push, that kind of link can decide whether the riders continue as one plan or break into separate reactions. The FPV drone moved toward that point, not as a random strike, but as a cut into the center of the assault. The moment it hit, The damage was larger than the explosion itself. One motorcycle was gone, but the real loss was rhythm. The riders behind suddenly had to choose what to do without a clean picture of the group ahead. The men in front had to decide whether to keep moving, slow down, or look back. This is where speed became a problem. A slow unit can sometimes stop, regroup, and listen for orders. A motorcycle assault cannot do that easily in open ground. The riders are exposed, the engines are loud, and every second spent waiting gives the drone team more time to prepare another attack. So the Russian group did not freeze. It split. Some motorcycles kept moving forward because stopping near the blast looked even more dangerous. They tried to preserve the assault by pushing toward the next cover line. Others turned toward the trees, hoping the branches and broken ground would hide them from the air. A few riders slowed down, shifted direction, or searched for another track around the wreck. In that short moment, the formation stopped being a single moving force. From above, the change was clear. Before the strike, the group had direction and spacing. After it, the assault became smaller targets moving with different choices. One line tried to continue the mission. Another tried to escape the route. A third began to lose speed and drift toward cover. That gave Ukrainian operators more than targets. It gave them a picture of panic, separation, and weak points. The motorcycle tactic depends on rhythm. The riders must keep distance, trust the path, and believe that the group will arrive together. Once the center is broken, that trust starts to disappear. The bike is still fast, but the attack is no longer organized. The soldier can still move, but he no longer knows if the next group is behind him or if support has already been delayed. That is why the first FPV strike mattered so much. It did not only remove one vehicle from the road, it changed how every other rider behaved. It forced decisions under pressure, and each decision created a new signal for the Ukrainian UAV above. If this first target choice looks more important than the blast itself, hit the like button, because the next stage is where the Russian support vehicles begin moving into the same trap. The Russian armored support now faced the hardest choice of the assault. It could stay back and watch the motorcycle push break apart, or it could move forward and risk entering the same watched route. Behind the motorcycles, the armored vehicle was meant to be the stronger part of the attack. It carried protection, heavier firepower, and the chance to support the riders if they found a gap near the Ukrainian line. This was the purpose of the hybrid assault. The motorcycles would bring speed, while the armor would bring force. But once the front group lost rhythm, that plan began to place pressure on the vehicles behind it. The Russian crew could see that the motorcycles ahead were no longer moving as one formation. Some riders had pushed forward, others had turned toward the trees, and the route was no longer clean. At that point, waiting too long could mean the assault would die in front of them. Moving forward could keep the attack alive, but it also meant entering ground that the Ukrainian UAV had already studied. That was the danger. The armored vehicle was not driving into an empty road. It was driving into a corridor already observed from above. The reconnaissance drone had watched the motorcycles use the same general approach, and it had seen where the road narrowed, where the tree line limited movement, and where a heavier machine would have fewer choices. By the time the vehicle started forward, the route had already become part of Ukraine's target picture. The driver pushed toward the lane to close the distance with the motorcycle group. The vehicle had more protection than the riders, but it also had a larger shape and less freedom to move. A motorcycle could turn sharply and slip through rough ground. An armored vehicle needed a clearer path, and once it entered a narrow section, its size became a weakness. Then the road was hit near the wheel line or close to the vehicle's path. The strike did not need to destroy the machine at once. It only needed to stop it, damage its movement, or force the crew to hesitate. In a narrow lane, even a short stop can change the whole situation. The lead vehicle becomes a block. The vehicles behind lose speed. The assault loses the connection between the front and the rear. This was the moment the hybrid design began to fail. The motorcycles ahead still had speed, but they no longer had reliable support. The armored vehicle had weapons, but it could not bring them forward in time. The two parts of the attack were now separated by distance, smoke, damaged ground, and Ukrainian observation. For the vehicles behind, the problem became worse with every second. They could not simply drive around the stopped machine. The route was too tight, and moving off the path could mean entering soft ground, mines, or another field of fire. If they slowed down, they became easier targets. If they reversed, they risked confusion and collision. If they stayed in place, the UAV above could keep tracking them for the next strike. From the Ukrainian side, this was not just a hit on armor. It was a way to freeze the whole support layer of the assault. The front group was already scattered, and the rear force was now trapped in a decision zone. Every option carried risk, and every movement gave the drone team more information. But the battle still had another layer. As the armored support stalled, Russian infantry began leaving their motorcycles and running in different directions. At that point, Ukrainian FPV teams could shift from striking vehicles to hunting the soldiers who had lost both protection and momentum. The most dangerous moment came after the motorcycles lost their speed and the armored support failed to arrive in time. At that point, the Russian infantry no longer had the advantage that brought them into the attack. The motorcycles had given them fast movement across exposed ground, but once the formation broke, that speed was gone. Some soldiers left their bikes and moved on foot near the tree line, damaged structures, and the open gaps between the road and the trench area. They were no longer part of one assault. They had become scattered men trying to survive the next seconds. The Ukrainian Reconnaissance UAV stayed above the scene and kept the wider picture in view. It did not need to see every face or follow every step perfectly. It only needed to keep track of direction, grouping points, and the likely escape paths. One group moved toward the trees. Another tried to return along the same route. Others slowed down near broken ground, looking for any cover that could hide them from the sky. This was where the fight changed from stopping vehicles to hunting movement. FPV drones began shifting toward the infantry who had abandoned their motorcycles. A soldier running across open ground was slower than a bike and easier to read from above. A man lying down near a track might look hidden from the road, but his last movement still marked the area. A small group moving together gave the drone team a clearer target than one rider moving at full speed. The Russian soldiers faced a hard choice. Staying near the wrecked motorcycles could make them targets. Running into the tree line might buy a few seconds, but it could also show the UAV where they were trying to regroup. Turning back toward the entry route meant crossing ground that had already been watched. Moving forward without support meant approaching Ukrainian positions with no stable formation left. Meanwhile, the armored vehicles behind them were still trying to solve the same problem from the other side. The support group had not disappeared. It still had firepower, armor, and the task of keeping the assault alive. But the lead vehicle had already been slowed or blocked, and the rest of the column had to decide whether to push through, stop, or reorganize under observation. Ukrainian FPV teams continued to pressure that rear layer. One drone could move toward the lead vehicle to keep the road closed. Another could threaten the vehicles behind it, preventing them from gathering enough momentum to break through. The goal was not only to damage metal, it was to stop the support force from reaching the stranded infantry at the right moment. This created a trap on two levels. In front, Russian soldiers were exposed after leaving their motorcycles. Behind them, the armored element could not restore the attack because the route was still under Ukrainian eyes. The two parts of the assault were close enough to depend on each other, but too separated to function as one force. The collapse became clear in layers. The deception failed when Ukraine waited long enough to understand the pattern. The communication link was hit when the central motorcycle was targeted. The formation split after the first strike. The armor was delayed in the narrow route. Finally, the infantry lost the only protection it had left, which was movement. This is why the end of the assault matters. It was not only a scene of burning vehicles or scattered soldiers. It showed how a modern attack can be taken apart step by step before it reaches the trench line. This assault may look small on the map, But it shows a much bigger warning for the war in Donbass. Russia is no longer relying only on heavy armored columns to push toward Ukrainian defenses. It is testing motorcycles, small assault teams, and armored support behind them, hoping that speed and surprise can open a path toward the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk line. But this fight showed the other side of that choice. Speed can help a soldier cross open ground, but it cannot protect him once a Ukrainian drone has already read the route. The key lesson is clear. Ukraine did not need to strike immediately to control the battle. The Reconnaissance UAV watched first, studied the movement, waited for the pattern to appear, and then FPV drones attacked the link that held the assault together. Once that link was broken, the motorcycles split, the infantry became exposed, and the armored support behind them was dragged into a road that had already been marked from above. In the coming weeks, Russia may try to adapt with stronger electronic warfare, more smoke, night movement, bad weather attacks, buggies, and even smaller teams. But the open question remains. Will those changes help Russia break the Sloviansk and Kramatorsk defensive belt? Or will they simply create new patterns for Ukrainian FPV teams to study and destroy? Share your thoughts in the comments. Like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear analysis.